Welcome to Community Connections, brought to you by Scaffidi, featuring conversations, stories, and interviews with Ottawa's leading change makers. Enjoy this episode. On this episode of Community Connections, we featured three of the candidates of the Alta Vista Ward in Ottawa's 2022 municipal election. We spoke with Bob Perkins, Marty, Carr, and Angelo, Gino, Scaffidi. All right, welcome in everybody to Scaffidi Community Connections. And today we're talking municipal election, and we've got one of the candidates for the Alta Vista Ward, Bob Perkins. And Bob was born and raised in the Alta Vista Ward. He completed a Bachelor of Commerce and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science at Carleton University, and then completed his Master's of Business Administration at Ottawa U. So nice dynamic there. Bob's family history of community service in Ottawa goes back almost 200 years. Wow. The tradition of community service and volunteerism has extended for 7 generations of his family. He and his partner, Edna, are raising their extended family in Alta Vista. Bob has been a trusted commercial real estate advisor for over 30 years in the National Capital Region, and in the past 6 years, his professional focus has been exclusively in the public sector and working with nonprofit organizations, assisting all levels of government across the country and over 10 municipalities, including the City of Ottawa. So welcome, Bob Perkins.
Thanks so much, Nick. It's almost like I wrote that. That was fantastic.
Yeah, no, great bio. Kind of alludes to my first question. We'll start with a bit of an introduction. We kind of already did, but tell us maybe a little bit more about yourself that we didn't have there and what qualifies you to be a city councillor.
Yeah, no, so I'm a longtime resident. I think that's important, but I think most importantly to my candidacy is I come with 30 years of directly relatable professional experience that the people of Alta Vista and the people of City of Ottawa will benefit from directly. So for instance, I've worked on infrastructure projects, I've worked on rezoning projects, I've worked on the last 4 official plans as a consultant, I've worked on community centers, I've worked on affordable housing directly. So there's a whole bunch of issues that are important to the people of Alta Vista and the City of Ottawa that I have some direct, relatable experience that I'm going to bring to the table.
Yeah, no, fantastic resume, and absolutely great that you've put yourself in service of the community. So let's talk a little bit more about the ward. Alta Vista is a very interesting ward. It's growing in leaps and bounds, as we all know. What do you feel are some of the key issues facing the ward in the years to come?
Yeah, so Nick, what I will say to this, so I was part of a debate about a week ago. And a part of my preparation was I went back to 2018 and 2014 to look at what were the prevailing issues surrounding Alta Vista and the city in general. And they are exactly the same. So that was my observation. So, and they include transportation, they include affordable housing, they include safe streets, they include infrastructure, crumbling roads. So the same issues are popping up, and this is 8 years later. So I think what brings to mind, and intensification is a fairly new item for Alta Vista, but it's a big one. So what it said to me, and it's one of the reasons why I'm running. So what it said to me is maybe we haven't executed on the solutions for these issues as a council or as a councillor in a way that made a material difference to kind of change the direction of those issues. So it encouraged me because I thought, well, maybe I can make that difference to kind of change the direction of these items in a way, and hopefully be able to encourage my fellow councillors to consider real action plans versus just kind of talking about the issues.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. Absolutely, some great issues there, and things that have kind of kept rolling for the last few years that have piled up, and definitely some important issues. So you mentioned intensification, you mentioned housing a little bit. We know that those are big issues in Alta Vista. I'm wondering how would you help tackle the lack of affordable housing in your ward, while at the same time keeping developers at task?
So they're kind of two separate issues. So I had the benefit of actually serving on a board committee of Ottawa Community Housing for 3 years as an advisor to Ottawa Community Housing as it relates to the kind of the real estate aspect of it. So in that time, got a clear understanding of, I guess, the issues facing the organization. And they're the largest provider of deep affordable housing as we know it. So that's the deep affordability issue. And their challenge is one of funding. So they have enough sites across the city, and with the help of the federal government in terms of free sites even. The challenge is they can't build the stuff well enough. The other challenge we have as a ward and across the city is we're demolishing existing affordable units to build, more conventional new housing that isn't so affordable. So that's, so there's one of a new supply, but old supply is being demolished and crushed. So that's both of them combined make for a longer waiting list for those that are in need of those kind of deep affordable units, and even those that are in the kind of the middle that they would just like an affordable place to stay within Alta Vista or any other neighborhood. So that's kind of the the federal government had an initiative through CMHC to try, it started about 4 or 5 years ago, to try and encourage the private sector to build more affordable units within their developments and provide some funding. Unfortunately, the initiative failed miserably, and there was very little take up on that. So I do think, there's an onus on the federal government to help come up with solutions along with the municipalities to kind of further that objective. So that's the kind of deeply affordable and the middle affordable, which are the existing units. We can't allow those to be demolished if we can control that, because they're providing affordable housing within communities that already exist. The keeping developers at bay is kind of a whole separate issue in my view. So I come from a real estate background, and I think most people know that I've worked for developers, and mostly in the commercial side. And where I see kind of my role in Alta Vista being very unique is I'm going to be kind of like the secret weapon that council has never had, because I frankly know what to ask and know how to get ahead of, I guess, a development within a community, because I've advised other municipalities about this, and I've been part of those discussions and those meetings. And I think that's what I'm offering as kind of my benefit as a candidate is I know this business, and I'm going to be like the insider that the city now has, and the residents of Alta Vista and the residents of the City of Ottawa will have at their disposal to drive the right plan towards getting the community what they want from a development perspective.
Yeah, no, great experience, and absolutely that would definitely cross over and definitely be an asset in the council chambers. Absolutely. So let's switch gears a little bit here. Let's talk about transportation. It's another major topic in your ward. I'm wondering, how would you improve transit options in your ward, and how would you encourage sustainable transportation across our city? And then also, do you endorse the Alta Vista corridor plan, which I know is a little bit of a controversial plan up in your ward?
Yeah, so I'll deal with the first one, the last one first. So the Alta Vista transportation corridor, I think, is an antiquated idea. It was 64 years ago it came onto the transportation plan. It really has no marginal benefit to the community to advance it. So my own approach to that is I'm not going to endorse any advancement during any term I may have of the project. I think it's an old idea. There's a current use in place that everybody likes. And I think until it's proven to me and to the residents of Alta Vista that it's going to be beneficial more than just, incrementally, that we should just shelve the project and not really consider it for a very long time. So that's that issue. I think public transportation, we've got a few issues in Alta Vista as it relates to transportation. One is public transportation, which when LRT phase 1 came in, there was a phase out of a lot of the local lines and runs of our bus service. And I've traveled across the ward. I've actually been handing out these postcards that I have. I've gone to 9,000 doors handing these out. So I was amazed by how many bus stops have been kind of decommissioned. They're just sitting there and there's no service coming to them. And what I'm hearing at the door is, you know, Paratranspo takes an hour to pick me up. OC Transpo, I've got to take, you know, it takes me 2 hours to get to Carleton University in any meaningful way. And they're just not accessible, and they're not providing the service that we need. Coupled with that, you know, we have a whole change in our transportation linkage. So I did a lot of work with the central agencies of the federal government, and they're going to be changing their portfolio, which has traditionally been downtown. So they're going to, you know, maybe a 40% footprint of what they had, and more of a hub and spoke type of approach to offices. Well, that will fundamentally, like, our entire system is based on a downtown, suburb to downtown kind of orientation. So I think we, you know, as a city as a whole, we need to revisit the entire transportation plan. We haven't done that. OC Transpo hasn't done. To, you know, not have empty buses going downtown now, you know, over and over and over, but let's look at servicing the needs of people within their immediate communities so that they'll jump back on the bus and we get our ridership up.
Yeah, great points. No, I think we've all seen those empty buses going by and think, you know, what's going on there, right? So
yeah, and Nick, sorry, to the last issue for us in Alta Vista is safe streets and traffic and speeding and cut through traffic in particular. It's been dealt with on an ad hoc basis, kind of micro neighborhood by micro neighborhood in the past, and it needs a comprehensive review to make sure that we know where, you know, and we have to have some definite traffic calming type of measures that work, because the ones we've put in place over the years just don't work and they're not effective. So that's kind of the summation of all the issues as it relates to transportation. It's a big one for our community, and I'm sure for the rest of the city.
yeah, no, absolutely. So let's talk a bit about diversity. We know Alta Vista is a very diverse ward. How would you plan to represent your diverse ward if you're elected?
Yeah, so you know what, again, my walk through the neighborhood, my walkabout, was a great experience for me, because even though I've lived here for, you know, 42, 43 years, I got to meet, you know, probably 1,000 people on the journey, and got to get a feel for not just the demographic of the area, but some of the different groups that may be represented that I, you know, wasn't aware of before, that actually existed within the community. So it was a great experience. So when I talk about diversity, I like to have the diversity and inclusion part of it, because I think diversity for the sake of diversity, it will happen naturally. And, you know, we can certainly benefit from different cultures, different, you know, different orientations, different people of all different stripes. We can definitely benefit from that as it relates to diversity. So that's the Canada's secret weapon, and hopefully Ottawa. But the inclusion is part of the fairness of that. So I think it's oftentimes a missing element. So we want to make sure that those that have special needs by virtue of culture or religion or what have you, if they have special needs, that they're being treated, especially by the city and their neighbors and everyone else, in an inclusionary way, in a fair way. So I think I advocate not just diversity, but it's all about inclusion and fairness that I think we need to have. So in speaking, for instance, to some of the Francophone community, you know, the services in French are an essential component, and you know, and they demand it, as they should, as you know, one of the official languages of Canada. But I think there's some other groups that have some special needs that we need to pay attention to, and as a councilor, you have to take into consideration in terms of any decisions you'd be making. But again, I want it to be levered on fairness as the backgrounder. It's not, you know, it's let's have diversity. Let's have everybody have the same opportunities, for certain.
Yeah, no, that's a great point about, the inclusion and the fairness and making sure those are part of the whole picture. So, no, great points. We know that community safety is another big issue. I'm sure you're hearing it on the doorsteps. When it comes to improving community safety, what issues come to mind as most urgent in your ward?
Yeah, so it's actually, I have a bit of an action plan, and it kind of focuses, and it's the number one issue for me, and I call it public safety. So in my time in Alta Vista, and I'm sure it's the same for any longtime resident of whatever community, we've had gang shootings, we've had murders, we have constant break-ins, we have carjackings, we have, as I said before, street speeding, stunt driving. So I think that that whole aspect of, are we dealing with it from a police presence properly? And I don't know the answer to that. That's the question I have. So I have a kind of a 4-point plan on how to deal with what I call public safety. And one of the ideas is to set up an actual group within Alta Vista to take responsibility for coming up with the plan and coming up with the data and coming up with the information, such that in concert with the police and city staff, we can come up with a best plan for Alta Vista. And included in that group, so again, in my journey, I've run into people that are current or former police officers that live in our area that would love to contribute to a plan and come up with the realities. I know there was a gentleman who worked in the jail system that's very well versed on kind of localized crime. And so, and we have lawyers, and we have all of these people in our community. So my idea was to set up a bit of a task force and get local experience people to join this task force from the community, along with staff, and let's come up with a comprehensive plan on how we can, best deal with this issue that is troubling every neighborhood. But let's be proactive about it.
Yeah, no, great points. We can't just expect the police to, dump it all on them. It's all about kind of creating that dialogue and leveraging the assets that exist in your community. So, no, that's a great plan. So, as we know, we will have a new mayor after the election on October 24th. What would you like to see this mayor prioritize across the city, and how do you feel you'd be able to work with a successful candidate?
Well, it's a great question. So I've luckily I've dealt with the three main contenders in the mayoral race. I've dealt with them all on different projects as it relates to the city. So I'm quite confident. And some of those include recreational facilities, senior centers, some business opportunities. With Mr. Shirelli was actually Lansdowne way back when. I'm confident that I'll be able to work with any of the people that may come forward. What I'd like to see from them is less. And I will explain. I'm running as an independent, so unlike maybe some of my other candidates in my ward, I don't have a political party behind me. I like to think, and I know the last council was kind of divisive on kind of ideology, right and left, and what have you. I would like to see in a mayor, and I'm not going to pledge this myself. If there's a good idea from the left, let's run with it. If there's a good idea from the right, let's run with it. Let's be open-minded and not stick to ideology that we think we need to as individuals. And I'm hopeful that the mayor will be able to get consensus that is different every time. So that's what I guess I'm advocating for is, let's hopefully have a mayor who wants to work with 24 other people and respect their abilities, their experience, and what they bring to the table. And let's come up with some answers that, notwithstanding political ideology, that makes sense for the residents of Ottawa. That's one. The other one, big one, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this today, but I'm a finance person. I've managed $100 million budgets in the past. I would like to have a fiscal responsibility kind of mantra at the city that basically verifies all costs, challenges all costs, and let's work with the City of Ottawa's tax dollars, just like we would our own households. Let's spend it wisely, and let's try to come up with a budget that is not automatically earmarked for increase. Let's try to save some money if we can.
Yeah, no, good points. I think that's what we're hearing is folks want a little bit more transparency on the budget, sort of understand how it works a little bit more, and are there some things that we can save and maybe invest in other spots, right? So, no, great points there. Well, thanks so much for joining us on Community Connections there, Bob. Any last words to leave our audience with before the election?
Well, I would just say, in terms of the experience, I'm a newcomer. I never thought I would be a politician. I still don't like. I'm not comfortable with the word for myself. But I want to say that I want to thank all of the residents of Alta Vista. My experience so far, although there's been some negativity to it, it's been the 90% has been people thanking me for putting my name forward and wishing me well. And I think it's been a great experience. So I just wanted to thank, and I'm sure that's the same across the city. I just wanted to thank the residents of Alta Vista that I've met that have, basically seen that all of this work that all of the candidates are doing, they thank us all for it. So I think that's what I would want to share with broadcast, that it has been a very positive experience for me, and I would hopefully encourage anybody else who'd want to do it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite inspirational to see individuals stepping up and dedicating that time to their communities. So well done, Bob. I want to wish you luck on the election on October 24th. And thanks again for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Community Connections brought to you by Synapsity. And today we are joined by Alta Vista Ward candidate Marty Carr. Marty is active in the Alta Vista community for over 12 years, where she has served on councils for both Alta Vista Public School and Ridgemont High School. She has also served for 5 years on the Alta Vista Community Association, including 3.5 as president. A dedicated community leader, Marty has led many successful projects from the replacing school play structures to bringing a farmer's market to Alta Vista. That's a great one. As president of the Community Association, she has led discussions with residents on the city's official plan, working with senior officials to bring community views to the table. Welcome, Marty.
Welcome. How are you today?
Doing great. Glad you could join us. So let's start with a little introduction. We talked a little bit about your past. Tell us about yourself and what qualifies you to be a councillor.
Well, thanks very much. So in the beginning, you talked a little bit about my experience in the community. So in those 5 years that I was on the Alta Vista Community Association, of which 3.5 were as president, I worked with city staff, the existing city councillor, on many, many files, led the response for the Alta Vista Community Association to the official plan. I've read that document many times, done a lot of analysis on it. Also worked delegating to Environmental Protection Committee to bring a invasive plant management program to the City of Ottawa. Worked to negotiate many different items throughout the ward with the city. And I really love the municipal stuff. So I normally work as a director in the federal public service. So I've got lots of experience in a leadership position, have been in a management position in the government for well over 15 years. And so I've got that experience, in a results-based management environment, asking those tough questions that sometimes get missed through regular governance. And so I think that substantive work experience, and I've got lots of experience in project management, stakeholder engagement, combined with, my knowledge of the depth and breadth of city files, really will help me as a city councillor.
Absolutely. Lots of experience on the work side and then lots of personal experience as well. So great job on what you've been able to accomplish so far. So let's talk a little bit more about the Alta Vista Ward. It's a very interesting ward. It's growing in leaps and bounds. What do you feel are some of the key issues facing the ward in the years to come?
Yeah, so you alluded to the growth, and that's something that, when we look at all the development applications that are on the books, whether they're paused or not, we've got about 10,000 new units coming into Alta Vista in about the next decade. And really the challenge for Alta Vista, which was built in 1950s as a car-centric suburb, is that our infrastructure simply hasn't kept pace. So we don't have a lot of sidewalks. We've still got the wide roads that are characteristic of that 1950s when land and gas were both cheap. And, our community centers are really old, really aging, and we don't really have that new community hub model. So we've got the Elmvale Library in a mall. We've got the Alta Vista Library. the community centers that we have, they've been largely used to house homeless populations through the pandemic. Jim Durrell was used. It's now under repair. The 2 ice pads are out for at least two years. The Dempsey Community Center is still being used to house the homeless. Heron Road just went back into commission. And then we have Canterbury. But, these are aging facilities. And to really bring that sense of community to Alta Vista, we desperately need some upgrades. Same with our playground equipment. We've got a lot of upgrades for ages up to 5 years old in some of the parks, but overall, we're building a big community here. It's a great place to live, but we need to start putting some investment in our infrastructure. We do put a lot of money into, sewer infrastructure because we're dealing with clay pipes from the, years and years ago, but we need to refocus some of our dollars to building the community that will support the new units that are coming in.
Yeah, some of the above ground amenities as well as the below, right? And for someone who's biked down Alta Vista a few times, it's a great route, but it's you got to watch some of those potholes, right?
Yeah, and so that's a great example. So, the Alta Vista Drive redesign project, which will be from Smythe to Bank Street, we undertook consultations on that 2 years ago. And at that time, they said, the project will be phased in 4 to 7 years. Well, it's still way down on the project list. We see that time and time again. Bank Street redesign is another one. Consultations were in 2012. And yet, it's finally going to hit the ground next year. That's a lot of things change in a decade. And so we've seen that project be delayed because of things like changes in protected intersection design guidelines. And so it's really hard to keep pace when we've got all this development and we're so behind in our maintenance and infrastructure.
Yeah, no, great points, and good for you for being on top of that. So we talked a little bit about it, but housing and development are huge issues in Alta Vista. I want to know, how would you help tackle the lack of affordable housing in your ward while also holding the developers to task?
Yeah, and that's a difficult question. They've recently introduced this inclusionary zoning, which of course is not in place yet. It won't be till 2023, but that's only for protected major transit station areas, of which there's not one in Alta Vista that I'm aware of. I think Billings Bridge is the closest. And again, the details around how that will work with the developers is really unclear, and how much affordability it will really bring. And so I think one of the key things is working with the developers from the get-go, and helping see how they can help provide some of this. Of course, Alta Vista is home to Herongate, which was, as we all know, made international headlines for the eviction of tenants. And so I was lucky enough to be involved in the process with the existing city councilor to have that memorandum of understanding drawn up so that there won't be further evictions, and worked with the developer, of course, to make sure that there's affordable housing. Now, we all know there's many, many different definitions, but at least it's something. And working with other developers, I think we've got a development on Bank Street now where the city is looking at whether they can leverage that development to have some affordable housing units. We have to take absolutely every opportunity. My biggest concern, to be honest, is the deeply affordable units. With the social housing registry list of 15,000, we've got lots of the OCH units, both townhomes and apartments, all throughout Ward 18. We're home to many, many of them. My concern is, we're not building those new social housing units as much. Even, OCH has got a new project over in Waterridge Village, 715 Micmac, but they're not going to be leveraging that social registry list. It's AV, I can't remember the name of the developer they're working with, but it's new affordable housing for, younger people that are getting started. So it's a different model. How we are ever going to clear off that social housing list, that is work that needs to be done and taken seriously. I've heard lots of people talk about leveraging federal government money. I mean, the reality is, before 1993, federal government used to provide social housing for about 30,000 people a year. Under this rapid housing initiative, it's about 6,000 units. Now that's across Canada. So I think, municipally, we've got a responsibility to start looking how we can help doing this as well. And it's not just the developers.
Yeah, no, great points. I know that wait list is quite long, 5, 10 years, maybe more. So definitely getting some of those folks into some housing is a priority. And yeah, great job on the Elmvale file as well. So let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk a bit about transportation, another major topic in your ward. How would you improve transit options in your ward, and how would you encourage sustainable transit? And you talked a bit about the Alta Vista corridor plan. Is that something that you support?
So let me, I'm going to leave the Alta Vista corridor to the end because I think it's a part of the larger discussion. So I was a transit taker prior to being sent home 2.5 years ago to work. Unfortunately, for most of Alta Vista, the LRT, because there's not an LRT station within Alta Vista, Herdman's the closest, it extended our time to get to work. And I've talked to people all over the ward, and local routes to get across the ward, it's just not set up to take you across the ward. Those sort of east-west connections are really, really poor. I tried to take the Ottawa Transit Challenge and to canvass around the ward, but it made more sense to walk even when it was an hour and 15 minutes away. So I've talked to people all across the ward, and they say, you mentioned the farmer's market at the beginning. They say, we would love to come to the farmer's market. We always have a musician there, but it's an hour and 15 minutes from the OCH building on Russell Road that serves seniors to come across the ward. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So I think we have a huge opportunity with the transportation master plan. They're doing the origins and destination study right now to revamp the local routes, figure out where people are going and how to get them across the city better. And we know that's going to take time, but I think in the meantime, we have to start looking at some quick wins, even if it requires a bit of an investment. And something that I'm really pushing for is on-demand services for buildings like that, senior centers, where we've got a lot of people. I look at in Herongate, where there's a lot of massive people living together, people that need to get to jobs that are at different kinds of day, and the bus is not getting them, because we all know opening up and looking at these routes, it's going to take a long, long time. So on the Alta Vista Transportation Corridor, I don't support use of it for cars. I don't believe the city supports the use of it for cars. There was never any funding attached to it. And when they did the new draft official plan, they named it the Green Transportation and Utility Corridor. And so they really saw it as active transportation, bike, walking, and potentially transit down the line. I've heard other candidates say, they want it removed completely. I don't think we want to remove it completely, because if we remove it completely, what happens to those lands? I think we want to keep it as an active transportation corridor. We've recently started removing snow in there, and then potentially, leave it on the books until such time that we have a transit plan in place that maybe we'll need to use that connection. I don't know if we'll get to LRT stage 4, but leaving it on the books with the caveat that it not be used for passenger vehicle, like single-use cars, I think is what my point of view is. And the city was more or less clear on that in all those consultations we did with the official plan, that it would be a green transportation corridor, but we needed the transportation master plan process to be finished to make that official.
Yeah, no, great points there. I think it's important to encourage cyclers, maybe a bus lane or a carpool lane. That would make sense to encourage people to come together. And also, about the bus routes as well. I think we've all been there where we just see those empty buses going by and thinking, okay, it's great that they're going, but how do we kind of shift things maybe a little bit? And I love the on-demand ideas as well. So transportation, housing, climate, they're all things that come with a large financial cost. What is your philosophy around taxes and spending? Just how should our city budget work?
Yeah, and so that's a really difficult one. I mean, gosh, you look at the city budget and what it is now, and 76% or so is mandated services that we have through the province, right? Whether it's fire, police, so you've got very, very little money to play around with. So how do we do that? I mean, and the record debt, and because I'm not sitting around the table already, I mean, I don't have the full ins and outs of the budget yet, but I definitely think with not expanding the urban boundary as much, we need to fix, not building new infrastructure, looking at opportunities for the future. There's so much need, but at the same time, this is not the time for massive tax hikes. One of the greatest things we hear from people is the affordability. We know that we have some of the highest property taxes in Ontario and in the country. We know that there's a huge issue with food insecurity. People are having difficulty making ends meet. So, I mean, it's not, modest increase, 3% and under supporting, but we can't make those, this is not the time to make those tax hikes. I know I've heard various things. People don't want a program review. From my point of view, we need to look at every single dollar that we can find. And, not saying to cut, program review doesn't imply cutting staff, but looking for efficiencies. So some of these things can be reallocated so that we can better support the cores. I mean, when you look at the core, like Alta Vista was one of the original suburbs, and we're not well served by transit. We're not well served by our recreational facilities. We're missing a lot of things. And I think it's really important that we do take a deep dive, line by line budget review to see where the money is, because we simply can't put the burden on the people.
Yeah, no, great points. Absolutely. So let's talk a bit about diversity. Alta Vista Ward's a very diverse ward. I'm wondering, how would you plan to represent a diverse Ottawa if you're elected?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and something I've been thinking a lot about, because you hear Alta Vista, and unfortunately I actually live in the community of Alta Vista, but there's many communities in Alta Vista. So having the neighborhood and the ward have the same thing, you don't really realize, like, we've got Herongate, we've got Hawthorne Meadows, we have Eastway Gardens, so much diversity. And I'll be honest, most of my canvassing has not been in Alta Vista. I've been trying to work all around and get to know these communities, and they all, feel that we're not connected as Alta Vista. And I think a lot of that is just, we've got such a bunch of diversity. Herongate's been really interesting, so much diversity there, and that's relatively close to my home. And I've been working a lot. My kids went to Ridgemont, which is right in the Herongate neighborhood. Worked on the Herongate steering committee. And one of the challenges I've had as a Ridgemont School Council person, as well as Alta Vista Community Association, is getting people who's got so many different priorities, who, new Canadians, getting them out to consultations. And I think the role of the councillor is really to come to the people and, really tailor the communications, talk to them about what's important. And it's going to be very different things across the board. What's important to people in some communities is food insecurity. Whereas, where I live, a lot of people are really concerned about what's going to happen with the zoning review. So, as a councillor, I think that do a better job of, leveraging existing consultations, but broadening them, taking more of a leadership role and trying to get that feedback from absolutely everyone. It is so diverse here, and people do not realize the diversity. I was at the food bank recently and talking to Richard Wilson, because the food bank is going to be moving into the Alta Vista ward. She's talking about how Alta Vista is one of the areas that has the highest need. We have 4 food banks here, and people don't realize that. They often think Alta Vista, wealthy community with the big lots. It's not the same way. So that's going to be a big challenge, is incorporating that. I will say my professional experience as a director of communications and lots of experience in stakeholder engagement, really looking forward to bringing those groups together to try to bring more diverse voices and diverse lens to all of our files, like the planning perspective, especially how we plan our communities. I mean, sorry, I'm kind of prattling on there, but you look at Heron Road and how communities used to be planned, and you got the R1 residential zoning on the one side of Heron Road and all the R5 where Herongate is on the other, and you see what happened there, and how we planned our communities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Assume that your project management skills would get flexed, absolutely. And yeah, good point about stakeholder relations as well. So let's talk a bit about safety. We know that's another major issue. When it comes to improving community safety, what issues come to mind as most urgent to address in your ward?
Yeah, it's funny talking door to door. I mean, road safety, of course, we hear a lot about that. People not feeling safe on the streets. And I think, one of the things I put together was a commitment is to look at it on a ward-wide basis as opposed to ad hoc. Lots of mixed feelings about how that, some people don't want speed limits reduced, but I think we need to look at how to make sure everyone's safe. One of the biggest things in our community is just basically, petty theft, theft from cars, trespassing. Obviously, a city council can't direct the activities of the police, but having those relationships with the neighborhood police, with the constables, is so important. I was lucky as a community association president to have a relationship with, you know, the neighborhood team. And, you know, when there was a concern, they would say, okay, we'll step up patrols in that area. Obviously, it's a difficult question because there's so many root causes as to why this is happening, right? It's, you know, theft, people not being able to make ends meet. It's, in some cases, it's drug use. There's a lot of root causes. I think there's a few quick wins we can do. I mean, I've heard a lot of concerns about parks. I mean, there's an arcane bylaw about no lighting in parks at night because it will draws people in. I think quite the opposite's happening. We're getting people in parks because it's dark, and, you know, looking at maybe some public realm lighting in some areas like around the Elmdale Acres transit station until it can be relocated. But that open relationship that a councillor needs to have with the neighborhood constables is so important.
Yeah, no, great points. And absolutely, you know, hopefully there's some stuff that kind of can be a bit more long-term, but then also some short-term solutions as well. So we all know that we're going to have a new mayor after the election on October 24th. What would you like to see this mayor prioritize across the city? And how do you feel you'd be able to work with the successful candidate?
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue is how we move around, and whether that's by bus, as I spoke about. That issue is not limited to Alta Vista. That's all across. The bus service is really poor. And I don't mean the drivers, and I don't mean, you know, the number of buses. I mean, it's still mostly driving people downtown, right? Like we're all aimed at commuter bus. We need to focus more on local transit, how we get along to do our day-to-day thing, especially with most of the civil servants home. The other thing, you know, about traveling, it's not just about the bus. The roads do need repair. The state of the roads in Ottawa is, as the capital city, is, I would say, almost deplorable, the maintenance. So, you know, we need to refocus on just basic repair, getting back to basics. Also, you know, in terms of even pedestrian safety, how we get around, you know, Alta Vista is particularly challenged. You know, we don't have sidewalks, was built in the 50s, as I said, and we won't get sidewalks until the road is opened up for sewer repair or anything else, because I think the city gives you a price of $700,000 for 1 kilometer of sidewalk. So just making sure that the roads are safe, that they're repaired, that the bus transit works, that people can feel as if they can move around in their community, that it's convenient. If we want to be incentivizing active transportation, I mean, often you know, you see part of a bike lane, and because the sewer work hasn't been done on the other part of the road, it's not going to be done for 3 more years. So how do we make those connections in the meantime? We've also got lots of projects, you know, just as an example in Alta Vista, train yards was supposed to be connected over to where the LRT station was when that was approved like 20 years ago. They're just doing the environmental assessment now. So I think a mayor overall like needs to step back and like look at, this is a big city. Every door I knock is transit, it's roads, condition of the roads, safe streets. So looking at how we get around. And how can I work with the mayor going forward? I mean, I do pride myself on being a very collaborative person. I'm ready to work with everyone. And I think, you know, everybody talks a lot about the fractious relationship for the last 4 years. And question I'm often asked at the doors is, you know, what mayor do you think can provide the leadership? The leadership is at the level of every city councillor at the table. It's not just something for the mayor. Every city councillor around that table has to be collaborative and professional and work towards creating a better Ottawa, regardless of who's elected around the table.
Yeah, no, great points. And I think we're all hoping and fingers crossed that we get a little bit more of a collaborative council for sure. Well, thanks so much for joining us on Community Connections, Marty. Any last words to leave our audience with?
No, I don't think so. It's always great. I get really passionate when I talk about city building, and I'm really excited to be running for council and hopefully be successful, and looking forward to many more of these discussions.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Marty. And today we're focusing on the Alta Vista Ward in Ottawa. It's a great ward, lots going on, and there's going to be a new councillor as the incumbent decided not to run. And we're chatting with one of the candidates today, Angelo Gino Scaffidi. And yeah, so let's see. He's been a longtime resident of Alta Vista Ward, 68 years, he tells me. So he's definitely tapped into what's going on there. So let's start with a short introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what qualifies you to be a councillor, Angelo.
Actually, what I feel qualifies me to be a councillor is commencing 2020, an issue arose in my neighborhood, and I've engaged in trying to get the issue addressed and heard by beginning at the municipal level. It's kind of evolved to the provincial level, and currently the matter is before the Ministry of Transport. It covers issues about land use planning and transportation corridors and how it interacts and affects the neighborhoods, and just to what extent actual guidelines that are in place are effective or being administered in an effective manner that results in a proportionate result and conclusion that doesn't affect the constituents, taxpayers in any negative manners.
Yeah, no, that's an important issue for sure. So let's talk a little bit about some of the issues in Alta Vista Ward. It's obviously growing in leaps and bounds. You know, a lot of people are identifying that area as a spot to buy a home or to rent. What do you feel are some of the key issues for the ward in the years to come?
Well, the key issues is that there's accountability and transparency in homeowners or potential homeowners that purchase in the area, and the assurance that certain rights and privileges are maintained or aren't due to ineffective decision making negatively affected.
Yeah, no, that's important, right? A lot of people are sort of maybe their first house is up there, or you know, they're just getting into home ownership. So let's talk a little bit more about the housing issue. We know it's a big issue, especially around development and those things in your ward. How would you tackle the lack of affordable housing while also holding developers to task in your ward?
Well, that's I understand to be this is a pretty complex issue. It involves serious and honest discussion between municipal decision makers and developers. I haven't at this stage been involved in any communications with developers, but I understand that is a process that happens. And from my perspective, I would expect that at the municipal level there would be negotiations and incentives created for developers that work in conjunction with the policies and concerns that municipal level decision makers would have. As far as what type of incentives, is something that has to be thoroughly analyzed and studied and see what can be done that balances out the concerns and interests of the tax-paying public as well as the developers. Because naturally developers are in the business to make a profit, but hopefully not at the excessive expense of potential homeowners.
Yeah, no, great points. You know, there needs to be that balance there, and sounds like you would definitely strike that. So let's change gears a little bit. Transportation is another major topic, especially in your ward. How would you improve transit options in your ward, and how would you encourage sustainable transportation? And maybe a few words about the potential Alta Vista corridor. Are you in favor of that?
The Alta Vista corridor proposal is something that that connects to issues that have been that has arisen, of which I I initially engaged in this from 2020 with contacting the municipal level, but the Alta Vista corridor, if there's components of that process that involves how it will affect homeowners on the let's see, the adjoining areas of the corridor itself, we have to ensure that the rights and privileges of the existing homeowners aren't encroached upon in terms of the creation of more noise and vibration that transportation corridor would create. And this ties into the issues that I'm in the process of trying to get addressed. I've become aware that there's some pretty stringent guidelines for the municipality to follow in terms of land use planning and corridor planning. And it's, the documentation is there. It's in terms of setback and mitigation measures for noise and vibration. I have observed currently that all the LRT construction is going on, especially on Highway 17 towards Orleans. They seem to be taking that into account, where there's a significant area of a buffer zone to protect the current homeowners from the ensuing noise and vibration that's created and will be created by the LRT that will be running there in conjunction with the roadway that's there already. So yeah, it's an important issue that the rights, the homeowner rights, aren't compromised for the sake of introducing another roadway or transportation corridor. Although it's understandable, it's for the purpose of providing accessible transportation to the citizens of Ottawa. But again, it's another issue of balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a bit of a balancing act there. Let's just a couple words on OC Transpo. A lot of candidates have called for a complete overhaul, a bit of an investigation into OC Transpo, how it works. Is that something you're focused on and you're hearing from constituents in your ward? There's concern over OC Transpo?
Somewhat. I haven't heard a lot about it, but I've followed to a certain degree the LRT inquiry that was going on, and judging from the questioning that was going on, it seems to reveal again problems that arise in bureaucratic systems, that the people that are in charge sometimes, in the zeal of getting a project completed, they circumvent certain rules that should, be observed. Because circumventing certain rules, unfortunately, lead to negative consequences, and unfortunately, quite often compromise the actual tax-paying public. The taxpayer, which essentially puts out the funds that are paying elected officials, which should be of utmost concentration and importance, that the elected officials are arriving at decisions that don't compromise the taxpayer.
Yeah, no, great points. I think a lot of folks are seeing that there's some issues with OC Transpo, and hopefully this next term we're able to sort that out. So transportation, housing, climate, all of these things come with a large financial cost. What is your philosophy around taxes and spending, and just how should our city budget work?
Actually, I pulled up the annual report, the City of Ottawa. Just looking at the numbers, I would actually investigate the possibility of looking at the expenditure in the City of Ottawa in terms of the money that's being put out to to members of the City of Ottawa, the salaries, there could be opportunity there to, not increase pay levels, and maybe even to the extent to reduce and try to generate or redirect the funds that are collected through the property taxes, et cetera, and redirect those funds towards issues and problems that need funding and addressing, like roadways, transportation systems. Because when you look at the budget, there's a pretty healthy proportion of the budget that's allocated to salaries. I'm almost of the mind of an employee of the city that's getting a salary of $100K plus. Would it hurt the individual to take a little bit of a pay cut and have those funds, because they're taxpayer funds, redirect those funds to segments of the balance sheet of the City of Ottawa, to have those funds applied to, again, fixing roadways, addressing community concerns, redirecting funds to address the homelessness issue, drug problems that are going on, the policing shortfalls that are what's the word, discovered or recognized. As far as policing, because one point I've made is, given this uptick of crime in the city, perhaps more patrolling by the police officers, so more of a presence may have an effect on reducing this.
Yeah, no, great points. Maybe there's a system where if city staff wanted to take Fridays off, they could have a reduction or some sort of sabbatical program, or, maybe a little bit more flexibility if they wanted to work part-time for a few months. Potentially there's a way to decrease some of those salaries and put those monies into something else. So you touched on it a little bit, and want to talk a little bit more about community safety. It's obviously a big issue in your ward. We're hearing a lot about, theft and break-ins and obviously shootings. What are some issues around safety that you feel need to be addressed right away in the Alta Vista Ward?
Well, I've gone to the City of Ottawa webpage, and there's sections in there, I don't recall the exact name, but it could be found there. But there's already policy in the city webpage information that, for example, proper lighting in the streets and walkways are properly lit. There's a segment where a section where I live that connects my street to Pleasant Park, and there's a lot of trees and there is lighting there, but sometimes the lights don't work. And if you walk down that, I've walked down that stretch, and quite often at night it's just pitch dark. So there's people in the community in similar areas where there's connecting walkways from one street to the other and not well lit. It's just like a prime location for people to kind of hide out, and if there's intentions of robbing or assaulting people, that's where it tends to happen.
Yeah, no, great point. Sometimes the smallest things like lighting can have a huge impact on the community. So, that's a really good issue. So we know that we're going to have a new mayor after the election on the 24th. What would you like to see this mayor prioritize, and how do you feel, if you were successful, that you'd be able to work with the new mayor?
Well, the key thing of working with the mayor And, allow me just to read what I've written up here. Decision-making authorities must remain vigilant of any decisions that may lead to the inequitable treatment of our taxpayers. Elected officials must ensure decisions are exercised with equitable proportionality, absent of favor to any one group of citizens and or disadvantaging others. Failures in achieving these objectives will only lead to creating tribalism and unwittingly plant seeds of dissent among our citizens. If you have one group of citizens feeling that their rights and privileges have been compromised in order to address another group, just leads to discontent among the population. And without getting to specifics, that's something that very personally experienced and in discussions with my local neighbors. There's discontent on how one group was treated as opposed to another.
Yeah, no, great points. Well thought out. I think everybody wants to be heard. And then the secondary thing is everybody wants to be treated equally, right? So two really important points there. And we'll hope that a new session of council is able to usher in those things a little bit more. So thanks again for joining us on Community Connections, brought to you by Scaffidi, Angelo. Any last words you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, again, for my notes here, the taxpayer is entitled to fair and just treatment. It's incumbent on elected officials to dedicate efforts in ensuring that this outcome is achieved. And I'll stand for transparency, accountability, and democratic principles. The principle of democracy has to be applied at all levels of government. If you have a group of taxpaying constituents concerned about a certain issue, and then that goes to council to vote and make decisions on. Having a group of people, let's say there's 1,000 people concerned about a certain issue, and that those issues are brought to council. The democratic principle has to remain intact. Although voting is done on a democratic process, when you have, say, 10 individuals and the democratic process, 6 people vote for or against an issue that involves 1,000 people, there's something off balance with that, because all of a sudden you've had a underlying democratic process has just overridden the concerns of 1,000 people or more. So it's like a decision-making process democratically has overridden the concerns of a larger majority, which leads to malcontent, discontent among the population.
Yeah, no, great points. It's how do we build that democracy into our system every day, not just a voting day, right? We hopefully encourage everyone to head out to the polls on October 24th, but it's also about staying engaged with the community all the way through the term, right? So really appreciate your thoughts, Angelo. Great that you're running, great that you're engaged in your community. Really admire that, and want to wish you luck on your campaign. Thanks again for joining us.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Thank you for watching Community Connections, brought to you by Scaffidi. Be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Until next time, stay connected.